Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about chip clearance, how a chainsaw gets rid of chips. Now generally speaking, a full chisel chain gets rid of the chips quicker than it does on a semi-chisel because there's generally much more room underneath the top plate in this area here. So even in Carlton chain, turn around and say that their full chisel chain in their 1976 catalogue, their full chisel has about 30% more space in that area that's all under here, all around in this area here. So that's a claim made by a lot of people. Now the other thing that's also interesting, if you look at the raker will be not in the middle, is more towards the side here, so that all the chips come out the back of the tooth. And if the raker is right in the middle, that hinders it. That's why if you have a look at a raker, it's got a slight bend on it. The rakers aren't dead straight, so the rakers are tilt to one side, so all the chips evacuate out the back here. Another thing that can happen, it's interesting, if you bog down a saw can bog down for two reasons. Let's just say you've got a reasonably powerful saw, very sharp teeth, all the rakers are adjusted with a progressive depth gauge. And in soft timber like pine, it's going to cut like a knife through butter. But if you put a little bit of pressure on that saw, it's going to even cut more. It's going to get clogged up with chips. I've stalled saws and I've had wood fibres in my bar that's blocked my bar up because the timber was a little bit damp, and there's just so much wood fibres everywhere that I put a little bit too much pressure on soft timber and I just blocked it all up and it stalled. Now that generally doesn't happen on hardwood because hardwoods are a lot harder to cut. So generally on really soft wood, I virtually put no pressure. On hardwood, I put a little bit more pressure. So I've just done a bit of a drawing over here and we'll just have a look at that. So what I've got here is a bit of a drawing of say 4 teeth, left and right. And normally the chips are going to go through here. If the rakers weren't there, they're going to go through much faster. But anyway, the way that a piece of or a chip is removed from a log is that you have this rocking motion. So when a chainsaw tooth goes through, it has this rocking motion like this. This rocking motion bites into the timber and lifts a bit of, so the moment that it comes along, strikes a bit of timber, tilts back, the raker comes in, and with the forward motion, it lifts the little chip up. Sometimes it takes it out, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't remove a chip of timber on the first tooth, the one behind it normally does. You'll notice also how the outside of the tooth, or the inside, let's say, this is the outside, the inside of the leading edge on the top plate overlaps each other. So that also helps to remove the chips. So it's claimed, as I said before, up to 30% extra area all in this region here between full chisel and semi-chisel. So all your wood shavings are all going out the back of the tooth like that. And if you line up the raker, you can see how the raker's bent on an angle. So if the raker was right in the middle like that, then that would hinder a lot of chips, and that's why they bend it slightly to the side for that reason. Now the other thing that happens also, when you've got a brand new chain, on a 3/8 chain that is, 3/8 chain, the tooth length's about 10 millimeters in length. On a 404, it's about 12 millimeters in length. So they're quite long. Now here's another little interesting fact. The 3/8 will reduce down to the witness mark Normally the witness mark is a mark like that on the back of the tooth. By the time you get to the end of the life, the 3/8 chain will be about lose 7 millimeters of length and only end up being about 3 millimeters. Now, if you lose 7 millimeters of metal on each tooth, multiply that by the cutters that you've got. So if you've got a 20-inch chain and there's 18 cutters each side, that's 36. So it's 36 by 7. And that's actually quite a lot of metal, because 36, I'll just try now, 36 by 7, that's 252 millimeters. A 252 millimeters reduction in length of the tooth allows more chips to flow through a lot easier. So just remember that now the other thing also happens is this, that the kerf gets smaller. So the width, when we look at a tooth, and if we're to look on the top plate like that, you'll find that it has a taper. So it's a lot wider at this point compared to this point here. So when a chain wears down, you get a lot more room between the cutters as the metal is being removed, filed or ground. The kerf gets smaller, which means it's easy for the chainsaw to cut through the timber. So some interesting facts, I'll just sort of bring them up, you may not know about. And between the semi-chisel and full chisel, a guy by the name of Joseph J. Sieber actually filed a patent for a full chisel chain in 1947. Now, that's interesting, because Joseph Cox ended up getting a patent for a full chisel chain in 1946. These were both filed in 1946. It usually takes a year or two before they're granted and approved. But in 1948, Joseph Cox first invented the Cox chipper chain. So he filed the patent in 1948, and I think it was in 1950 it was granted. So you've got Joseph Cox, who invented the chipper chain. He also invented the full chisel in 1946, so he actually done that first, but it took a few years before it got approved. And Joseph J. Sieber in 1947 got a patent for a full chisel. So I don't know how they actually got, Joseph Cox got a patent for a full chisel, and Joseph Sieber got a patent for a full chisel, and they're only 1 year apart. That's interesting. And Ray Carlton invented the semi-chisel in 1961. That's when he filed for the patent, but he got knocked back quite a few times. I think it was about in 1964 before it actually got granted. So going back then, there was a lot of changes, and even back then you found out the difference between the Cox chipper chain had a much larger radius on it compared to what it has today. To Ray Carlton's semi-chisel looks a bit different. This is virtually what Ray Carlton's semi-chisel looks like. The Cox chipper chain has more of a question mark on it. It's a totally different profile, and the full chisel is obviously looks like a number 7. So it's got a totally different profile. So it's just interesting when you have a look at all the changes through the ages and where we're headed now. And, you know, we've virtually got Hexa by Still and X-Cut by Husqvarna. And then you've got titanium coatings. We're starting to see that on a lot of chains. So, but interesting enough, just to briefly recap, that all the shavings, most of the shavings or the little chips that are generated by the two cutters, the left and right cutters, the front of the tooth severs the fibres. If it doesn't take a full chip out, the next tooth in front of it or the next tooth behind it comes along and takes that out, and they all come out of the back. And as I said earlier before, if you push too hard on softwood, you can bog the saw up. Normally, if the wood's dry, you'll never jam up the bar, but as I said, I have jammed the bar up completely full of wood fibres, and I pushed a little bit too hard. So in wet timber with high moisture content, probably in excess of 20%, be very careful. All those wood fibres can block up and stall your saw, which has happened to me, and then you've got to pull the bar off and pull it and try and unclog it. So that's just interesting. As I said, someone was asking me about the evacuation of the chips. The only other thing that I would say is obviously cleaning up the gullets help a lot of bit. I don't think it has a huge amount in the chip evacuation, but everything helps. Every little bit helps. So that's virtually it. So look, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.